So today's video is going to be about lunar tides in the color Moonstone. My swatches are labeled 1 through 12, but that is not synonymous with hair levels. That's just to help us keep track of the swatches throughout the video. 1 is green, 2 is gray, 3 is a natural red, 4 is black, and then from 4 to 11 we have a range that goes to platinum blonde, and then number 12 is like a toned version of the platinum blonde. I buy my swatches as is, so for the unnatural colors, I just picked 2 of my lightest. I know this is a pastel dye, so I wanted to see just how much of this it would turn blue. So I'll be taking the dye directly from the container and I'll put it at the top of each swatch. And then some people do dilute their dyes, so I'll be putting the diluted version at the bottom of each swatch. Just keep in mind that everyone's hair is different, which means everyone's hair will take dye differently. Your hair may not turn out like my swatches. Also, my swatches are dyed, except the black one. The black one is the only one that is virgin hair. So if you have virgin hair, it might not take dye as well. Either way, it's always best to do as much research as possible when dyeing your hair. So since this dye is so pastel, I don't think I'm going to dilute it too much. I'm going to do a 2-to-1 ratio, but this time it's going to be 2 parts dye and 1 part diluter. I do get a lot of questions about diluter. Some people think you need to use it to make your dye work, but that's not true. There's a variety of reasons why people do dilute their dyes, but essentially it just lightens the color of the dye. I always use a white conditioner when diluting. I'm going to let these sit for about 3 hours. I'm going to rinse them out, and then when they're dry, I will meet you back here. I already said earlier that this is a pastel dye. Even though it did technically dye 9 and 10, I still would say that it looks best on 11 and even number 12. Number 9 and 10, it just kind of looks like a color that faded. It has a bit of a green tone, I assume because of the yellow in the hair. And then with 11 and 12, I personally think it looks a little bit better on 12 because to me it looks like it's not fighting the hair as much. Number 11, it's a nice blue, but in person you can see some of the strands took a little bit more green looking, but because this one was toned first, the blue looks more consistent and smooth. On number 11, it looks a little bit more like a sky blue to me, so I guess it just depends on the kind of color you want. Number 2 was a gray before, right? So I think it looks pretty similar. Actually, it looks a little bit more cool tone on the gray swatch, which makes sense. We'll have to see during the close-ups, but I will say that the diluted number 8 looks a lot more cool toned. So it's possible that maybe if you dilute this dye a little bit, you might be able to use it in darker hair that has a little bit too much orange in it to help cancel out the orange. But we'll see how that looks in the comparison close-ups. As for comparisons, I haven't done any blues that are quite like this, but I'll pull out what I have that's the most similar so far. So more so for curiosity's sake, I did want to compare this to Arctic Fox's Periwinkle. So this is comparable to number 12. This is comparable to number 11. And this is comparable to number 10. So Periwinkle is very, very pastel. It's one of those dyes that it kind of just depends on your hair and how well it takes dyes in certain colors. I've heard some people have a really, really hard time getting it to work with their hair, and other people, it looks even more intense than my swatches. But like the name implies, this is a more cool toned bluish purple, so it's not quite the same as the Moonstone. Right out of the bottle, Moonstone definitely holds a little bit more of a warmth to the blue. And I wasn't expecting this to look similar, but in case anybody else was curious how close they might be, I thought I should compare them. Now, staying within the Arctic Fox family, they do have a deeper blue. It's not super dark, but that one is Poseidon. And I feel like the diluted portions might look similar. So this is comparable to number 12, 11, 10, and 9. So Poseidon is not a pastel dye, so it does a little bit better of a job dyeing the darker blonde swatches. I will say as you dilute it on number 9 and 10, it does start to look a little bit more green. But Poseidon is a slightly more cool tone blue, so I thought that this part might look close. I think number 12 definitely looks very similar. Number 11, it looks a little bit more green on the diluted part. But these are human hair swatches, and I'm sure they're not all from the same person, so that could be something to do with it as well. But in terms of undertone, they are very similar, so if you like Moonstone, it's just a little bit too light for you, you might be able to get away with diluting the Poseidon instead. And my last comparison is going to be from Ion in the color Azure. So the Ion Azure dye is not quite as dark as Poseidon, but it's darker than the Moonstone for Lunar Tides. So this is comparable to number 12, number 11, number 10, and number 9. So the Arctic Fox Poseidon to me is a bit of a muted blue, just a little bit muted, and Moonstone from the Lunar Tides also looks a little bit muted. So the Azure, it's a similar blue, but I would say it's a little bit more saturated looking. So the blues are not super far off from each other. Once again, it just depends on the kind of color you want. If you want a lighter blue that's a little bit brighter, the Azure might be better. You could dilute that if you wanted. And then the Moonstone looks a little bit more cool toned, a little bit more ashy looking. So that is all I have for comparisons so far. In the future, if I do any other colors like this, of course, I will compare Moonstone to that color. Now we can get into the close-ups. I hope this video helped. If you have any requests, I do have a link below to a Google form you can fill out. Just remember, I only do dyes that are not tested on animals. It's storming where I am right now, so I'm sorry if you can hear the thunder in the background. Thank you to my patrons, and thank you so very much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.